Hello, this is Victor James again, author of the Megacosm, and I want to talk to you guys about George R.R. Martin. So before I begin, I want to say right off the bat that I am not as good a writer as George R.R. Martin. Not yet anyway. So this isn't a criticism of his writing at least, which I think is great. I mean, obviously it's great. Look at the level of fandom he's built over the decades. And this is not a defense of George R.R. Martin either, but my takeaway as a writer, because even with all the accolades and fame, there is still a cautionary tale I found there that I wanted to get into. So let's explore the entire picture of George R.R. Martin's situation, which is that he's very late on his last two books for his mega series, Game of Thrones. And people are really wondering if he'll ever get these last two books out. So to put things in perspective, George R.R. Martin is currently 76 years old. We all seen him on TV, he still seems sharp, he's competent, but 76 is 76. But when he first began writing Game of Thrones, he was 43 years old. This is what he looked like at 43 when he started writing A Song of Ice and Fire in 1991, which is relatively a young age when you still have tons of energy, your mind is sharp, you're clear, your bones don't hurt. And plus this was before the fame, and he's not married and he doesn't have any kids, so he had plenty of time to put all his energy into the books. So as most people know, there are 5 books in the main series: A Song of Ice and Fire, A Clash of Kings, A Storm of Swords, A Feast of Crows, and A Dance of Dragons that he's already finished. So I did some digging. That's approximately 4,200 pages with 1.7 million words. And that's not even counting his side stories like Dunk and Egg, which add to his word total. Just put that in perspective. That's a staggering amount of word and pages for one series. And this is why Game of Thrones has such a rabid fan base, and why HBO poured so much money into the TV series. It's just prolific. The world George R.R. Martin built with Westeros, it's rich in depth in various locations, it has different factions with their own history, and plus there are a ton of characters. And let's talk about the characters. So there are approximately 2,000 named characters across the books, and again, approximately 24 point of views we follow while reading the books. I say approximately because I used AI to calculate, so it might be more or less, but you get the idea. And this is where I find, taking caution with my Megacosm storyline, that I'm tempting to write. Trust me, I'm getting to my point very soon, I promise. So I wrote my first book, Fiasco of Adventures, in 2022 during the lockdown. I created maybe 20 named characters, and I only used one point of view. But since then, I've written 2 novels and 4 short stories. If I was to write a follow-up to Fiasco, I would probably need to reread the final edition again just to ensure I didn't contradict anything in my new novel. So what I'm trying to say is that time is a beast for a writer. Well, time and beer. I like beer, and beer affects the memory. But I see now why writers usually stick to one storyline and write their novels consecutively. When you do so many other things while trying to write an expansive story, it just becomes impossible to keep everything in line. So back to George. So George was doing this. When he started writing the first book in 91, it was published in 96. The second one came out in 98, the third in 2000, the fourth in 2005, and the fifth in 2011. He was 63 at the time when that came out. He was still sharp, he was on a roll. He only had 2 books to finish this epic series. Given his timeline, 5 years for each book, approximately, he would be finished by 73. So in his mind, he would have been done by now, with all of the books. But then Game of Thrones debuted on HBO in 2011, the same year as his last novel, Dance of Dragons. I don't need to get into the details, but pretty much any adult alive right now knows just how big Game of Thrones was in pop culture. And that's when George started writing, and that's a cardinal sin for a writer. I can tell you from personal experience that when I stopped writing a story, I rarely go back to it. Either I didn't like it as much as on paper as was in my head, or I fell out of love with it. But I believe George R.R. Martin when he says he still loves Game of Thrones. I mean, that's his baby. Just like Star Wars was George Lucas's baby. He's still involved in the HBO series that they are making, but those are TV shows and not the books. To try to pick back up for 2,000 characters with 24 different point of views and all their storylines at 76, I just can't imagine. I'm not even that close to that age and I can't imagine. Just keeping the storyline threads intact alone would be staggering. Okay, before anyone gets on me, I understand. I am sure George R.R. Martin has a ton of assistants, and there are mega fans and fan sites who have kept meticulous notes on all the hanging storylines in his books. But again, he would have to go through all those notes, all those pages, just to ensure he doesn't contradict what he wrote in the past. If he does finish Winds of Winter, which I think he actually might, maybe, I have less hope for A Dream of Spring, which is his last book. Unless George shocks the world and announces them both done at the same time, and this is why it's taking so long. But that might be just wishful thinking. Now, there are rumors out there right now that Winds of Winter is done. So Fan of Pulse just recently came out with an article saying he finished it before the crash landing of the Game of Thrones series. But that ending was something that fans hated. And the rumor is that it mirrored the ending of his book, which he's already written. And now he has to go back and rewrite Winds of Winter, which means reading all those storylines and notes all over again. Remember that we approximated he gives about 5 years per book. So it probably won't take 5 years, but to go back and rewrite a whole novel, it's gonna take at least 2 to 3 years, which at 76 is asking a lot. Plus, in his latest blog post, he admonished the fans for only being interested in Game of Thrones property, while he loves all of his properties and will give them all his attention, which means he's going to be working on different things while he's writing Game of Thrones. What this means for Winds of Winter, I don't know. I still think it gets done, but the story will still not be over because The Dream of Spring still needs to come out after that. So my takeaway from George R.R. Martin's situation is to obviously finish the stories while they're fresh in your mind. And this goes double actually when you start cultivating a rabid fan base. Readers do not like even the prospect of an unfinished story that they put their time and money into. I mean, I read the first 5 books in Game of Thrones, so I'm a fan too. So I get that the time sink it took to read 1.7 million words and enough pages that amounts to reading the King James Version of the Bible 3.5 times. That is a lot of reading and a lot of books. And honestly, this is why every single one of my stories and books so far are one and done. Fantastic Adventures is a standalone story, which means it was never meant to have a sequel. Now, I have thoughts for a sequel and where I would go if I did write one, but I never wrote it with a sequel in mind. All my short stories are one and done, and my next novel, in the Megacosm, the Narika, it could be read as a standalone story too. I have a pulp novel series outside of the Megacosm that I want to be ongoing, but again, I appreciate my beer, so I don't want it to be Game of Thrones type storyline or that long. I actually have an ending in mind, but I guess for new writers like me, there are just many lessons to take away from George's situation. If someone with his talent and keen mind can get distracted, or maybe even fall out of love when his story is too long and convoluted, then writers just maybe need to think twice before embarking on a story that is this vast. It's just not in all of us to keep up and finish it. So thanks for listening to my thoughts on George R.R. Martin. I hope he really does get them done because I really want to see this story to the end, but I can totally understand why he won't be able to do it. Let me know in the comments if I'm being too easy on George. Maybe there's just no excuse for not having your books done. You can read my book, Fiasco Adventures. The link is down below. And also check out my website, themegacosm.com, where you can read my short stories for free. Anyway, kept you long enough. God bless you and keep you. That's it, I'm done.